Welcome back to another Ohm Lab tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about parallel processing. We feel that, it's been overcomplicated by a lot of people, and so much emphasis is put on parts of the process that just are simply not necessary, I think. This is an incredibly easy process to do. It's a neat technique to use to make your sounds even better in so many different ways. It's an industry standard nowadays. And if you're using a modern DAW, it should only take you a couple seconds to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through how to set it up, what parallel processing even is, the different types of things you can do with it. And we're not just talking about compression. You always hear the term parallel compression. That's just one type of parallel processing. Okay, we can set up reverb this way, EQing this way, many different things this way. But we'll get to that. So if you're following along and you happen to be using Logic Pro, I'm just using stock sounds. Okay, you can easily grab the same exact sounds. Logic Pro is not necessary for this. You don't need to use the same sounds. You can use any sounds that you like. You can use. Okay, this is a very universal approach to mixing here. So I've gone ahead and taken the time to set this all up in advance, so we don't have to go digging around through sounds. I've color-coded things so you can see how they correlate to one another in the arrangement window and the mixer. Okay. Now, if you were to take a sound, here we'll just create a new track, just for example purposes here. If you were to take a new sound, whatever that sound is, and start adding things to it directly, this is called serial processing or inline processing. Okay. Now, what we want to do is process these sounds independently from the original sound. And in order to do that, here I'm just going to really quick delete this. Okay, now to create a second version of one of these sounds, it's as simple as sending this sound through a bus to an auxiliary channel. Now, to create the auxiliary track, all you have to do is click on this little send area, choose a bus. Bus number 1 is empty in your DAW right now. You go ahead and click that, and you end up with this sound being sent to this auxiliary track over here. Now, when you're working in parallel processing, what you don't want to do is hear the original sound all the time, because all that does is double the volume, right? If two identical sounds on two different tracks are playing simultaneously at the same volume, it's just going to sound really loud. It's not going to do anything for you. So DAWs have this nice little feature in these sends here. If you just click and hold on it, on this button, you can come down here and change this to pre-fader. And I really suggest doing that, because that way you can just turn down your sound all the way. And you don't hear it when you're playing back your sound, yet you still hear the audio in the auxiliary track. Now, all you have to do to send the audio through this bus is to turn up the volume knob here. Okay, we'll just run through this really quick. There's no send. Okay, this is just this sound. We'll solo it. This is the original. Okay, nothing too fancy. It's just an abstract atmosphere sound, kind of rhythmic. Now we're going to send this sound to this auxiliary track, and you'll see that this knob is dark right now. If you turn this up, if you click and drag up and down, you can see that you can change the amount of audio that's being sent to the auxiliary track that's correlating to. So you can also use this quick little keyboard shortcut in Logic. Just hold down the Alt Option key and click. Now you'll notice that this this volume knob on this send is green, and it's on the other side as these. And the reason is because I have not yet set this to pre-fader. It by default is set up as post pan, and you'll probably want to switch it back to post pan after you've already set up everything to your liking on your auxiliary track. But for now, what we're going to do is leave this on pre-fader. Okay, so now what we hear, we'll go over here and we will unmute this, and we'll just go ahead and we'll turn off all of these, and we're just going to listen to just this audio here. Okay, so now there is no audio coming from the original track, and you can see here on our auxiliary track it's the same exact sound. Okay, now what I've done is I've set up an EQ. Okay, and we'll listen to the sound and we'll turn the EQ on and off so you can hear the difference. Some volume back up for you. Just turn this on now. It's pretty drastic. It's a pretty big difference. Now, the reason why I took out so much of the low end and emphasized these textures in the middle and some of this high-end crispness is because, again, this is a secondary iteration of the same audio that's going to be served up in your track. The whole point of parallel processing versus serial processing is that you can keep your original audio intact. You can preserve the original integrity, the shape, the behavior, the delivery, the resolve, everything, and process it all in this secondary audio chain. So this is what the new sound sounds like. Okay, so we're really calling attention to some very different aspects of this sound. The low end stuff is already covered in the original sound. So now let's take a look at the compression. Very, very simple compression setup. Again, we'll play the audio and then we'll turn on the compression partway through it. And with the compression now. Okay, it's big and it's brutal, and you'll notice that, bam, there's clipping here, and oh, the ratio is all the way up to almost 10, and the compressor threshold is all the way down at -35. The gain is up at 22. There's a reason for this. Okay, this auxiliary channel is not going to be played back at full volume, first of all. And second of all, what we're really wanting to do is not necessarily ignore the sounds that are already easily heard, but what we do want to do is make the lesser heard sounds much more present in the mix. We want to draw much more attention to them. And in order to do that, what we do is we basically lower the volume of the loudest elements of this track through compression. Okay. Now we're also going to add some reverb. So I'm going to lower the volume here just a little bit, just because we are clipping. I don't want anyone's eardrums to get blown out. Listen to the transformation now when we turn on the reverb. It's a big difference. Okay. You hear that audio tail. This is another point of using parallel processing versus serial processing. Now let's say you wanted to cut that sound, but you wanted to allow the reverb tail to continue. Now, if you were doing this all in line or in serial, then it'd be difficult. It'd be difficult, right? Because that track, the volume fader of that track controls all of the volume for that track, including the audio tail of that reverb effect. Now, when the reverb is actually being served up through an auxiliary channel, that's completely independent from the volume of the original audio. So you can do whatever you want with the original audio and allow that reverb tail to play out. And we'll show you a good example of how that actually works here in a moment. But for now, just know that we've applied the reverb. Specifically, this type of reverb that I've set up is a little bit complex. But the things to keep in mind: EQ, you want to take out some low end. You don't want to muddy up your mix with a lot of bass notes. heavy, dark notes, noise, that type of stuff. It's very hard to get out of the mix once you get it in there, so be proactive and avoid it. The other thing you'll notice is that there is no dry signal being used here, and there should not be. Anytime you use reverb, you should know what the reverb sounds like, and the only way to ever know what the reverb actually sounds like is to take the original signal out of the equation of what you're actually hearing in the output. You'll notice that it's just the reverb or just the wet part of the mix that we're listening to. Okay, and that's really important. You have to know what the reverb sounds like to know what it's actually going to do to your sound. The other thing I did was I inverted the stereo positioning here. Okay, the original audio is very much biased towards the right, so what we're doing is flipping that. So this signal that's coming out of this auxiliary track is actually going to be biased towards the left. It's going to have a totally different sound. It's going to be much airier and brighter compared to the original one, so it's going to add a ton of depth. A lot of interest too. So in turn, it draws the listener in, transforms them from being a passive listener to an active listener, and that's exactly what we want. So let's listen to this one more time, totally processed as it is. We're going to lower the volume here as we listen to it too, just to kind of get our ears acclimated to hearing it at a much gentler volume. Okay, it's probably going to be around in here somewhere, maybe a little bit louder when we actually incorporate this process sound into the original sound. Now let's do that. We want to take this all the way down, and we'll take our original audio all the way up, and we're going to slowly bring in our process signal. Let's do that now. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Now you'll notice that that reverb is continuing on the auxiliary channel and not on the original channel. So this original channel is going to stay very clean for mixing purposes. And now let's do a comparative. Let's listen to it without and with. We'll start with the process sound added. Now without. And again with. Okay, so that's our first sound. Let's move on to the next sound. I've already set up some tempo changes here so we can hear these loops as they were intended to be heard, so we don't have any kind of weird artifacting or you know, weird manipulation of sound because the speed is different. So this one is a bit of an abstract sound. I'll listen to it as it is on its own. Okay, just some little blips. Now let's listen to it with the parallel processing that we've set up in place and hear the difference. And without. Okay, so let's see what we actually did to make that. First of all, we set up an EQ. Actually, before we go that far, let's just go through these steps again. Click on the send slot, pick bus 2. It's going to be brand new. Then you're going to send the audio to bus 2. You're going to switch this to pre-fader. Okay, then you're going to lower the volume of that track. Now you're going to come over here, and we'll listen to it. Let's turn these off. This is what it sounded like originally. Then we added this EQ. Didn't change it too much, but it really restricted the overall frequency range. So there's very little frequency here, and that's, or a very small window anyway, and that is important once we get into these next steps. This is a tape delay. A little bit of feedback, a tiny bit of swing added to this. We've cut out even more of the low end to make sure that it's very crisp and clean. A little bit of modulation in here, and again, you'll notice there is no dry signal. No dry signal. Whenever you're working in parallel processing, you want to make sure that you're only ever dealing in wet signals, only the affected signal, because you have the dry signal already in place with the original track. That's very important to keep in mind. All right, and then the last thing we did was we added something called a ring shifter. Okay, and this is going to add just a little bit more delay to the equation, and it's also going to shift the position of the sound in the stereo field. It's going to affect the panning, basically. Now you'll notice that there was a little bit of dry signal in there. We need to move this over to the wet again. I think I just bumped it. Okay. And we'll go ahead and take this down, and we'll take our original audio back up to its original position and slowly bring this up into the mix. Let's listen to it again. Okay, and actually, you know what? I want to go back in here. I want to listen to this again. We're going to take down this. I'm going to take even more of this sound out. This upper end here. There we go. You see that last spike drop off that was right there? It was getting a little bit harsh for me. So we'll just go ahead and bring this back up to original. And without it. And again with it. All right, so you can see there was no compression added here at all. So compression is absolutely not part of the parallel processing idea or technique. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one is basically like an electro beat, the type of sounds that you hear in a beat in a lot of music these days, from dubstep to complextro, all the way down to mainstream pop. It's been reincorporated into music. Electro's had a huge resurgence. So let's listen to the beat in its original form, and then we're going to listen to with the processing added. Okay. Okay, now there's a couple things to take notice of really quick before we listen to the process sound added in. It's pretty flat. There are textures in there. It's interesting. It's got a funky rhythm, but you're much more focused on the meter of the drums than you are on the actual sounds, and that's because they're all very, very flat. They're very one-dimensional. So let's listen to that one more time. Okay, now with the processing. Just a lot more impact. You hear the textures a lot better. So let's see what we did. First of all, we always take out whatever low end we don't need. And in fact, I'll actually bump this up a bit just to make it a little bit more extreme. You'll notice we bumped up the kick drum. We've kicked up the snare and the cymbal. We've taken out the noises that can make your ears bleed. And we also added in a bit of the middle where some of those nice buzzy textures are. That come in and out, and you can see those actually in the analysis here. Okay, now the only other thing that we added to this was compressor, and we opted out of the default circuit type. We went for the vintage optical, increased the attack, the release was brought up, the knee was brought down a little bit, so we have a little bit quicker action on there. Ratios around 9, compressor thresholds down around 30, and the gain add back is huge. Let's see. There's nothing that's not being compressed in this mix. So let's again bring this back up to around where it was, and we'll bring this down, and you can hear it being added back in. Now, the reason why this is working is because in the original audio, the original peaks and lows of the sounds in this loop are still there in the same exact spot. Now we've very much limited the range in which the sound is being blown up in the process track. So if you were to overlay the image of this waveform and lay it on top of this waveform, what you're going to see is that the center of the sound, the center of the waveform, is going to be much thicker. It's going to be much, much more bold. But those edges, those very tall peaks, those are going to be around the same. Okay, so it's really important to understand that you're maintaining some dynamic range here in the sound, and you're still just making this so much more impactful, and you're increasing the awareness and the attention on those textures that were very flat and hidden before. So it's really neat. Now let's take a look at another type of beat. When we're not talking about this new aggressive texture and glitch-rich kind of approach to beat making, you're going to go back in time and listen to some analog beats. Listen to this. Very, very simple. Let's add in the process track. Okay. So that kind of makes it a little bit more current. You can hear maybe some beatboxing going with that, some interesting lyrics. You could absolutely have a little bit of call and response with some different synths, some bass, something like that. So it definitely makes it more current. But how do we do it? It's very simple. Again, just like the last one, we took away and we accented where we wanted to. Now, in this case, we're not necessarily accenting through attenuate or through increasing the volume. We're accenting through attenuating or reducing the gain of the things that we don't want to be the focus. Took out some low end. We muted the bass drum. We took off the high end. We muted the snare. Let's listen to this again. Let's listen to it on its own. Very different. Let's listen to it without the delay here. And without this EQ. And with it again. I said snare earlier. It's a shaker. I'm sorry. We could actually bring this down just a little bit more even. Okay. So all we're doing is we're creating a different set of sounds to listen to, or shifting the focus on each one of these elements that are already pre-existing. So the other thing we did was we added a little bit of stereo delay. It's overall, it's fairly gentle compared to what it could be. Not a whole lot of feedback coming in and out. We're only going to be listening to the wet. We've got beat sync turned on so it doesn't get too chaotic. Slightly different swing between the left and the right channels. And you'll notice again we cut that low end. I'm actually going to take just a hair off of this top end too. So we'll listen to this again. Okay, so you can hear it. It's bouncing back and forth between the two channels. We have just enough separation in between those two. They're operating between a quarter and a 16th note. All right, let's stop that. We'll bring this back up to where it was originally, and we're slowly going to bring this in. Okay, and that's it. So the last one we're going to take a look at is the vocals. It's a very short clip, female vocal, and we'll listen to it on its own first.
Oh, yeah, oh.
Okay, there's a reason why I chose a female vocal sample over a male. Number one, we have limited time. I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things that I find most amazing about a lot of female vocals. The breath, that tiny little bit of added texture that comes from the throat and the way that they control it. Now, of course, males do this as well. It's just that it happens at a slightly different timbre, a slightly different pitch. It does not necessarily resonate the same way with the human ear. So what we want to do is we want to pick those things out and exploit them. So again, this is our original audio.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's listen to it with reverb added.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, there's a fine line between not enough or too much reverb when you're not listening to the other sounds in a mix alongside it. So just something to keep in mind. It's a significant difference between those two versions. So let's go ahead and look at what we did. Take the volume down on the original, listen to just the processed. Here's the original again.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is just a little bit of compression.
Yeah.
2.5 to 1. Bump that knee up just a little bit. As you can see, when I go through these things and I click around here and there, it's basically just showing that, none of this is like an exacting science. Of course, you can dial something into the precision that you want, and that does take a little bit of time. But this was all set up in a matter of seconds, basically, on each one of these tracks. So it's really impressive what can be done in very little time. So just that touch of compression, what that was, what we accomplished with that is it brought out just a little bit more of the texture and the breath. Okay, now we're going to emphasize that a little bit more with some reverb programming. Okay, you'll see that we have the volume of the reverb coming down here at the end. And we may actually want to bring this down just the opposite way. Okay, the EQ, we've dumped the low end. We've kind of accented the texture, that throatiness, and then of course that breath at the very end. And I'll take this down just a touch here. Again, no dry signal at all, only the reverb. Okay, we've added just a little bit of pre-delay to create some separation. We'll get into how we actually decide how we arrive at the pre-delay number that we use in a future tutorial. So again, here's the process sound on its own. Okay, we're going to bring that down, bring this back up to its original position with the original audio. Slowly incorporate the processed audio. Okay, now we're going to listen to an A-B comparison here. We're going to listen to it on its own, then processed. It's a pretty significant difference. And when you go back and you listen to any of these sounds, they're so very different than what they were in the beginning. Yet the original audio, the original character is still present in every single one of them. None of that would be possible if you were doing this with traditional serial or inline processing. So again, here is our original, or our first atmosphere that we looked at. Stop it really quick and you can hear that the reverb tail is only present on this auxiliary track. It's brilliant. It's a great way to gain total control over your affected sounds. Here's the abstract element here. Okay, our electro beat, very punchy. Doubled up the rhythm of our analog drums.
Yeah. oh, oh, oh.
And we breathed some life into Carlos' performance there. So that's it. That is parallel processing in a nutshell. I know it took some time to get through all of this, but the initial idea of just clicking in that empty send slot, clicking on a bus number, sending audio to it, done. You've already created the auxiliary track. Now all you have to do, switch this to pre-fader mode, turn down the volume of the original audio, and start working on that auxiliary track. It literally takes less than 10 seconds to do, and it's a great way to improve the overall quality, sound, and control of your projects. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with another one shortly. Take care.